My name's Jordan Vega. I'm 31 now, but what I'm about to tell you started when I was 18. 1 week before I left Minneapolis for good and didn't come back for over a decade. Back then, I still thought family was supposed to mean protection. That illusion shattered on a warm June night, somewhere between a hug I didn't want and a silence I never asked for. It was my cousin Theo's birthday. The whole Vega clan had packed into Uncle Ryan's backyard. White folding chairs, rosaries hanging from car mirrors, Aunt Colleen's potato salad everyone pretended to love. It was loud and crowded, the kind of family gathering where you smile too wide and pray nobody asks when you're getting your life together. My mother had just handed me a slice of cake when Aunt Mel, my uncle's wife, walked up and hugged me from behind. I stiffened. That smell, her perfume, the way her hands always lingered too long, it made my skin crawl. I don't remember deciding to speak. I just turned to my mom and said softly, "She used to touch me when I was a kid, when no one was looking." My mom blinked once, then again, and then she laughed. Not a full laugh, just a short, sharp sound like someone clearing their throat to cut the tension. "Jordan," she said, still smiling, "you really need to stop being so dramatic." I just stood there, the air getting heavier around me, like the backyard had turned into a soundproof box. No one else heard. Or maybe they did and didn't want to. Later that night, I sat in the back seat of our van while my mom drove us home. My dad was unusually quiet. When we pulled into the driveway, he didn't get out right away. He looked at me through the rearview mirror and said, "You're old enough to know better than to say things you can't take back." I opened my mouth to defend myself, but the doors clicked locked. He turned off the engine, got out, and walked inside with my mom. I sat in that car until midnight, hoping someone would come back out. No one did. The next morning, my bank app showed my debit card was frozen. Health insurance, gone. Phone plan, canceled. My name erased from everything like it had never belonged there in the first place. When I called to ask what the hell was happening, my dad answered and said, "Stay with a friend. We'll talk when you're less emotional." That was the last real conversation I ever had with either of them. I crashed at my friend Ash's place for 3 days. Her mom was kind, but I could feel how temporary it was. People are generous until it gets uncomfortable. By day 4, I was getting polite signals to move on. I took a bus to a local shelter for women. They told me I had to be under 18 or with a child to qualify. I stood in that lobby, dirty sneakers and a drawstring bag to my name, and felt the weirdest calm I've ever known. Not peace, just clarity. The kind that comes when everything's already burned down. I started sleeping in my friend's car. Not Ash's. She couldn't risk her mom finding out. This other girl I barely knew let me borrow the back seat of her Civic, parked behind a strip mall. The seats were cracked and smelled like fast food grease, but it was safer than the streets. I didn't cry. That surprised me. I think part of me had always known this family had a line you didn't cross. Not the kind built from morality, but one drawn in tradition, silence, and performance. I crossed it the second I spoke out loud. What made it worse was knowing they didn't even believe me. Or worse, they did, and they just didn't care. On the 6th night, I woke up at 3 a.m., heart racing from some dream I couldn't remember. I sat up, grabbed the little spiral notebook I kept in the seat pocket, and wrote just one sentence. They locked me out because I told the truth. Then I tore it out, lit it with the lighter I stole from the gas station, and watched it curl to ash in the empty coffee cup by my feet. I left Minneapolis the next morning. No plan, no money, no goodbye. Just a Greyhound ticket to Boise, Idaho, bought with coins I found in a vending machine tray and the last $20 I had in my sock. I didn't know what waited for me there. But I knew whatever it was. It couldn't possibly be colder than where I came from. Boise was supposed to be a pause button. Somewhere to lay low, breathe, figure out what the hell came next. But life doesn't stop just because you're tired. It just keeps going. And if you can't keep up, it runs you over. The first night I got there, I slept at the Greyhound station. I used my backpack as a pillow and tucked my shoes into the strap so they wouldn't get stolen. There was a kid next to me, maybe 16, who offered me a half-eaten granola bar and told me, "You get used to the smell." He meant the station, but I remember thinking he might have meant this whole part of life. I spent 3 days looking for work before someone at a church pointed me toward a warehouse on the edge of town that hired no questions asked. That's how I ended up on the graveyard shift at Clearline Distribution, packing boxes of paper towels and off-brand baby formula into pallets that never saw the light of day. It wasn't just the work that was heavy, it was the quiet. No one asked why you were there. No one cared what your name really was. We all clocked in, kept our heads down, and clocked out. The foreman, Rick, said on day 1, "Don't bleed on the product. If you do, clean it or get gone." That was it. That was the job. My room was a converted garage behind some guy's house. No windows. The walls were thin enough to hear his dogs scratching in the night, but the rent was $80 a week, and he didn't ask for a deposit. I paid in cash, stayed invisible, and kept to myself. After a while, I started writing again. Not anything deep, just phrases, half-formed thoughts. Sometimes I'd write out fake conversations I wished I could have. One night I wrote a letter to my mother. Didn't send it. Burned it in the bathroom sink with a match I borrowed from the break room. I didn't cry. Not until week 7. It was during a shipment rush. We were short-staffed, as always. A woman named Raina, who mostly kept to herself, collapsed on the line. She was 6 months pregnant, though no one had said it out loud. She'd been working through the cramps, lifting 40-pound boxes like she was invincible. She fell hard, didn't scream, just gasped like someone knocked the air out of her. Blood pooled under her. I froze. Everyone else just stared. Rick yelled, "Don't touch her. We'll get it handled. Go back to your stations." And I walked over anyway. I knelt next to her and held her hand, called 911 and told the dispatcher exactly where we were. I didn't know her, but I wasn't going to watch her bleed out in a place that didn't even care to learn her name. Rick fired me on the spot. Said I endangered the shift. Said Rena wasn't even on the books, so now there'd be questions. Said I should have minded my damn business. I walked out with nothing but the same drawstring bag I'd arrived in Boise with. Except now it held a pair of steel-toed boots and a sweatshirt that smelled like bleach. I sat on the curb outside the warehouse for hours. My hands still smelled like iron. I kept replaying the way Reina's fingers gripped mine. How she didn't cry either. Just looked at me like she needed someone to stay until the ambulance came. And I did. I stayed. That mattered more than the job. I didn't know that someone else had been watching. A week later, I got a call on the prepaid flip phone I bought for $12 at the gas station. The voice on the other end was calm but firm. Said she was with a legal aid clinic downtown. "My name's Mira," she said. "You helped Raina. She's safe now. She asked us to call you." Mira asked if I'd ever thought about working somewhere that didn't treat people like packing tape. I laughed. "You hiring?" She said maybe not officially, but she had a chair, a desk, and a coffee machine that sometimes worked. It was more than I'd had in months. So I showed up. I didn't have credentials, experience, or references. Just showed up. The clinic was a cramped space above a laundromat that smelled like fabric softener and exhaustion. Mira didn't ask for a resume, just handed me a folder of intake forms and said, "Let's see how you handle this." I never told her about Minneapolis, or my parents, or the church parties, or the backyard cake. But Mira saw something anyway. She looked at me like I wasn't broken, just rebuilding. And for the first time since I left, I thought maybe that was enough to start over. The first few months at the clinic felt like walking barefoot across broken glass. Every form I touched, every voicemail I transcribed, every broken voice I heard on the line, it cracked open something I hadn't realized I'd sealed shut. And somehow, sitting in that cramped office with peeling paint and a busted ceiling fan, I started to remember what it felt like to care again. Not just survive. Care. Mira never treated me like a charity case. She didn't coddle me or pry. She handed me work and trusted me to handle it. That trust, it changed everything. I started small, data entry, prepping intake packets, filing, but I paid attention. I listened to every story the women told when they came through that door, gripping grocery bags or baby carriers or nothing at all. They all carried something heavier than what was in their hands. There was one woman, Letitia, who came in shaking so bad she spilled her water. Her husband was a corrections officer. She'd tried to leave once. He told her, "Try it again and I'll have you flagged. You'll never see your kids again." I watched Mira take that case like a blade in her palm. Calm, sharp, careful. That night, I stayed late. I reread every statute Mira had quoted in Letitia's file. Then I found myself online, pulling up community college courses in paralegal studies. I didn't have a high school diploma, but there was an option for students with GEDs. I didn't tell anyone, not even Mira, but I applied. A few weeks later, I got the email. I was in. I'd never celebrated anything alone before. I didn't buy a cake or tell the guy at the corner store. I just sat on the back steps of the clinic that night with a cold soda and let myself feel proud without asking for permission. The classes weren't easy. I worked full-time at the clinic during the day, studied at night, barely slept. My room was still a garage with a leaky water heater and raccoons in the ceiling, but my books were stacked in neat piles. I wrote case briefs on the back of junk mail when I ran out of paper. It was messy and exhausting and unbelievably worth it. 2 years passed like that. I became the person people went to when Mira was out. Clients would walk in and ask for the girl with the ponytail who talks straight. Some days, Mira would hand me files without a word. That meant trust. That meant I wasn't invisible anymore. Then one day, something shifted. A nonprofit called Safe Steps invited us to a city meeting on survivor advocacy policy. Mira had a conflict and sent me instead. "Just listen," she said. "Take notes. You don't have to speak." The meeting was in a big white building with polished floors and fake plants. Everyone had blazers and water bottles with logos. I showed up in the only clean jeans I owned and a too big button-up I found at Goodwill. I sat in the back, like Mira said. But when the conversation turned to what survivors need, the room filled with buzzwords. Resilience frameworks, trauma-informed scalability. And then someone, a man in a navy suit with 2 white teeth, said, "We have to be careful not to enable dependency." I don't know what happened. I just raised my hand. They all looked at me like I wasn't supposed to exist. I said, "Dependency isn't the issue. Survival is. You don't teach someone to swim by handing them a report and watching them drown." The room went quiet. The woman next to me mouthed, "Thank you." After that meeting, I got an email from a woman named Carla Medina. She ran a community defense fund out of Portland and had read the transcript of what I said. "You ever thought about policy work?" she wrote. "We could use your voice." I didn't answer right away. Truth is, I didn't think I had a voice. Not one that mattered. But that email stayed open in a browser tab for weeks, staring at me, daring me to believe it. In the meantime, I graduated. GED, then my paralegal certificate. Mira threw a small party in the clinic break room. There were cupcakes and a card signed by every single client I'd helped that year. Some of them only knew me as the girl who picks up when you call scared. That night, I walked past the courthouse and sat on the steps. Just sat. People think revenge is loud, but sometimes it's just being alive in a place where you were once erased. I emailed Carla back the next morning. I said yes. A month later, I packed my life, what little of it there was, into 2 duffel bags. Mira hugged me once. Just once. She said, "Don't be polite when it's time to be powerful." I moved to Portland. I didn't know it yet, but I was about to learn that power doesn't always come with a title. Sometimes it starts when you realize you don't have to explain yourself to the people who once refused to see you. And I was done explaining. I hadn't heard my father's voice in over 11 years when I saw his name flash across my phone. Gerald Vega. I didn't answer. I was sitting at my desk in Portland, surrounded by sticky notes, policy drafts, and a crumpled granola bar wrapper from lunch I never finished. Outside, it was raining the kind of soft, miserable rain that never makes headlines but always gets under your skin. I stared at the screen until the call went to voicemail. 30 seconds later, a text came through. "We need to talk. Please come home." No context, no apology, no "how are you?" Just a command in the shape of a plea. It would have been easier to ignore it. Should have been. But curiosity is a funny thing. It doesn't care how much therapy you've had or how far you've come. When ghosts knock, some part of you still listens. That night, I found out through a colleague that a major case had cracked open back in Minnesota. A Catholic charter school director had been indicted on multiple counts of child endangerment. It was in all the local papers. What wasn't in the papers, at least not yet, was the list of legal advisors involved in shielding the school. My father was one of them. The same man who kicked me out for embarrassing the family was now at the center of a cover-up that made national news. The optics were bad. Worse than bad. And someone must have told him, "You better get ahead of this." That's when it hit me. He wasn't reaching out because he missed me. He was reaching out because I was useful now. I didn't reply. But I didn't delete the text either. 2 days later, another message arrived. This time from my older sister, Hannah. I hadn't spoken to her since the night she told my parents I made things up for attention. Her message was short. "Jordan, Mom's not doing well. You should come by. Just dinner. No drama." I read that line. No drama. At least 10 times. Funny how the people who created the trauma always expect you to leave it at the door like muddy shoes. Still, against every instinct I had, I went. I told myself I just wanted to see it with my own eyes. The people who erased me. I needed to know if I could walk into that house and not shrink. If I could sit at that table and not feel like a ghost still begging to be believed. I flew in on a Friday, rented a car, and drove straight to the neighborhood I once called home. The houses hadn't changed much. Still neat lawns, same flagpole in the yard, same wreath on the door, like time had pressed pause right after they shut me out. When I pulled into the driveway, the porch light flicked on. My mother opened the door slowly, like she wasn't sure I'd actually show. She looked smaller, thinner. The years hadn't been kind, but I didn't feel pity. Just distance. Inside, the dining room table had been set like a magazine ad. Cloth napkins, candles, roast chicken that smelled like my childhood Sundays. They were trying too hard, and it only made everything feel worse. My father stood when I entered. So did Hannah. No one hugged me. But everyone stared like I was a memory they weren't sure they'd imagined. "Jordan," my dad said, clearing his throat. "We appreciate you coming." I nodded once, sat down. Dinner was awkward, polite, fake. My mother asked about my job, as if I was an accountant or some school teacher 2 states over. She didn't say the word advocate. She didn't mention policy work. My father brought up some vague article he'd read about false allegations and how good people get dragged in. That was when I put my fork down. "You didn't invite me here to catch up," I said. "So what do you want?" They exchanged a look, like teenagers caught sneaking out. Hannah spoke first. "The media's circling Dad now. Some people think if you made a statement, just something neutral, it could help shift the narrative." I didn't say anything. I just stared at her. My mom added, "You're respected now. People listen to you." I took a breath so deep it hurt. Then I asked, "If I weren't the person I am now, if I were still the girl who slept in a Civic behind a strip mall, would you have even remembered my number?" Silence. My father finally looked me in the eye and said, "Jordan, sometimes family, we make mistakes." I laughed once. Quiet. The kind of laugh you let out when nothing's actually funny. "You didn't make a mistake," I said. "You made a decision." I stood up, pushed the chair back gently, and looked around the room that once held every version of me. Child, daughter, liar, disgrace. I buried myself for 11 years so I could be born again as someone you couldn't break. And now you want to borrow my light to clean up your mess?" They didn't respond. Before I left, I reached into my bag and placed a folded document on the table. It was a draft of a new policy I'd been working on with the Portland Council, one that gave survivors legal protection when speaking out against institutions tied to family or religion. One that would, ironically, make it harder for people like my father to ever silence voices like mine. "No need to read it," I said, heading for the door. "It'll be law soon." My mother called out as I stepped onto the porch. "Jordan, wait." I turned slightly, not enough to give her the comfort of full attention. "Please," she said, voice breaking. "You're still our daughter." I smiled. "No," I replied. "I'm my daughter now." 3 weeks after I left that dinner, the story broke wide open. A state ethics watchdog released a report showing emails between my father and leadership at the charter school. Messages that confirmed what many already suspected. He'd advised them to handle concerns internally and avoid drawing attention to incidents that may be isolated misunderstandings. That phrase, isolated misunderstandings, was repeated in every article, every press conference, every angry parent's statement. The public wasn't having it. Survivors came forward. The local paper ran a Sunday front page with the headline, "Protecting Power, Not Children." Underneath that, in smaller type, Gerald Vega, legal counsel and father of state policy advocate Jordan Vega, named in cover-up scandal. That last part, they added without my consent. Reporters reached out. Everyone wanted a quote, a soundbite, a headline like, "Daughter of disgraced lawyer speaks out." But I didn't give them one. I'd already said what I needed to say. Not through a camera, not on a podium, but in every law I helped shape, in every person I refused to let be silenced. Still, the fallout came fast. Dad was removed from his advisory board role, lost several clients. His firm released a carefully worded statement distancing themselves. But that wasn't what stuck with me. What did was the image someone posted on Twitter. Him, standing outside his office, alone, his face buried in his hands. No tie, no suit jacket. Just a man whose armor finally cracked. I didn't gloat. I didn't text him. I just let it happen. Because justice doesn't always need witnesses. Sometimes it just needs stillness. A month later, the Family Impact Disclosure Act I'd co-authored passed its first round of city approvals. It would allow survivors to legally identify familial conflicts in institutional abuse cases without risking retaliation, funding loss, or disqualification. Simple on paper, huge in practice. At the first public hearing, I stood behind a wooden podium. No fancy microphone, no dramatic music. Just me. A plain navy coat. A trembling hand gripping the edge of the table. And a row of people behind me. Young and old, some crying quietly, some holding hands, waiting to speak next. "I'm not here to tear down families," I said. "I'm here so families can't tear down the truth." Someone clapped. I kept going. Later that day, I stepped out into the hall and saw a woman standing alone, clutching a copy of the bill. She looked familiar. It took me a second. Letitia. From the warehouse? The one who collapsed. She walked over, hugged me once. No words. Just the hug. That moment hit harder than any headline. That night, I walked through downtown Portland as the city flickered into evening. No cameras, no chasers. Just me, passing through the quiet, finally able to breathe in a life I'd built with my own hands. I stopped by a community center where Carla was hosting a panel on survivor-led reform. I didn't speak. I just listened. Near the end, a young girl asked from the back of the room, "What if my mom says I should stay quiet?" Carla smiled and said, "Sometimes silence is inherited." But so is courage. I felt that in my spine. On my way out, I checked my phone. One new voicemail. It was my mom. Her voice was shaky, almost like she was learning how to use it again. "Jordan, I don't expect you to answer. I just wanted you to know your father stopped going to Mass. He says it's because people stare. I think it's because he knows God saw everything. I don't know if you'll ever forgive us. I just hope you don't forget who you are. Because you're not the same girl who left here. You're better." She paused, then added softer, "I still keep your baby picture in the hallway. I never took it down." I didn't call back. I didn't delete the message either. I just stood at my kitchen counter, poured myself some tea, and let the words sit there. Not to wound, not to fix anything, but just to be. Some things don't need fixing. They just need to stop growing roots inside you. I used to think closure was someone else's apology. But now I know. It's the moment you stop needing it. The day you realize you can live your truth without asking for permission is the day you get your power back. If you've ever had to walk away from family just to become yourself, I see you. Drop a comment if any of this hit home for you, or if you're still somewhere in the middle of your own story. And hey, if you're still listening, still healing, still fighting to be heard, I'd love for you to stick around. There's more to tell, and I think we're just getting started.